welcome to part 2 of our Oceans podcast. My name is Amy Barnes, Head of Climate and Sustainability Strategy for Marsh. Welcome to our Oceans podcast, in which we feature conversations with Marsh colleagues, risk professionals, and other people intended to help you better understand key risks, build more effective insurance programs, and to think creatively about what's possible. In the first of our Oceans podcast, we heard on the vital roles that oceans play in the aquatic systems and the significant threat that they're under from anthropogenic activity. I'm joined again by Dr. Howard Dryden and Diane Duncan. Howard and Diane have extensive experience of both the science of oceans and their role in planetary health, their role in climate change and helping either exacerbate or prevent it, as well as the policies that are protecting the oceans and those that are causing harm to the environment. So welcome back, and I'm looking forward to another stimulating session. Howard, having really clearly set the scene about the importance and the diversity in the oceans, can you now talk about the anthropogenic side, businesses, and which businesses are having the most significant impact on the ocean, but in fact, any aquatic environment?
Yep, for sure. Well, the oceans are absolutely critical and important for all life on Earth. You know, we depend upon the oceans for upwards of 50% of our food, for carbon sequestration, and for the oxygen that we breathe. Now, you know, over the last 70 years, the oceans have been the receiving ground for all our waste, all our pollution, chemical and plastic, and that's not sustainable. There is a cause and effect. And if we lose nature, both on land and in our oceans, then the survival of humanity does come into question. Now, there are certain industries which will be impacted, and there are industries and governments which are causing these problems. Now, the obvious one is the fishing industry. You know, if we take fishing around the UK as a case and example, trawling for fish destroys the benthic communities and the seagrass around the country. And the destruction of the seagrass around the UK is equivalent to the loss of the seagrass, you know, is equivalent to the carbon produced from the burning of kerosene for the aircraft industry. So, you know, in terms of the importance, you know, of an unseen resource, you know, the fishing industry has been responsible for destroying that. Also, when we sailed across the Bay of Biscay, the fishing industry, as a bycatch, killed 10,000 dolphins every year. Now, like most communities, you know, you cannot take out one organism without repercussions and impact on the rest of the ecosystem. It's really important we keep a balanced ecosystem. Otherwise, you know, they can become unstable. And currently, we're faced with a situation where we've already lost 50% or more of all life in the oceans. And over the next 25 or 30 years, that will be up to maybe 80 or 90%. And at that point, ecosystems become unstable and are no longer sustainable. So it's really important we do not allow them to get to that point. Now, we've already discussed that you know, chemicals and plastic are impacting on marine ecosystems. So let's look at where the problems actually are coming from. You know, it's aquatic pollution, atmospheric pollution, and 80% of all the pollution entering the oceans starts on land. And as a marine biologist, our focus is primarily with water. And with regards to water, municipal wastewater treatment is a key aspect of this. Now, 80% of the world does not have any municipal wastewater treatment. And by way of example, I've worked extensively in India. And if we take one city, Bangalore, as an example, Bangalore is a city of some 10 million people with no effluent treatment. The effluent all enters big lakes in the outskirts of the city. So you can imagine that the waste from 10 million people entering a lake with no effluent treatment, it ferments and it produces methane. Methane is 120 times more a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So because there's no effluent treatment for Bangalore, they have a carbon footprint equivalent to 1 billion people. Now, if you then multiply that up among the 80% of the world that has no effluent treatment, huge impact of methane into the environment and also nitrous oxide. Now, if we take it closer to home in Europe and North America, you think that we're treating our water very well. And indeed, most of the water is treated biologically, but there is no tertiary treatment, or at least only 10% of the effluent treatment plants have tertiary treatment to remove microplastics and chemicals. So effectively, why you think we're treating our water, within Europe, and we are in terms of removing organics from the water and nitrogenous products, the chemicals and the microplastics are still entering the marine ecosystem, and it's these chemicals that are causing damage and harm to the environment. Now, the other source of microplastics include the textile industry and just wearing clothes. You have microfibers going off into the atmosphere. And indeed, on every square meter of the planet, there are in excess of 500 particles of microplastics that drop every day. Whenever you wash clothes made from plastic, then the plastic fibers are released into the environment. And we now know that in the Atlantic Ocean, there are on average 7 particles of microplastic in every liter from the surface down to a depth of 200 meters. Within the next 2 or 3 years, there will be more plastic in the oceans than animals and plants. And we know this plastic is toxic to the plants and animals. And as Diane said in the last podcast, plastic acts like a sponge and it absorbs toxic chemicals. And oxybenzone was used as an example of a toxic chemical. And oxybenzone is the active ingredient in sunblock and cosmetics. Well, it's also the active ingredient in sunblock in plastic. And the world manufactures 350 million tons of plastic. And along with that, up to 1% of the plastic contains oxybenzone. So potentially, we're putting 3 million tons of this chemical into the environment. And it's toxic at a level of 62 parts per trillion. And that works out at 70,000 tons of oxybenzone going into all the world's oceans is actually sufficient to kill most of the plankton. Yet we make 3 million tons of this chemical every year. Another example of this is the tire industry and the car industry. We're moving now forward to electric cars, which are 50% heavier than petrol or diesel combustion engines. So tire wear is a great deal more because of the heavier vehicles. The tire compound is toxic. We know it's highly toxic to aquatic environments, the antioxidants that are being used. And the plastic and rubber that wears off the tires is going into the atmosphere and being washed off with storm water, which is not being treated. And that's responsible for up to about 30% of all the microplastics in the environment. Yet there are compounds available which are much more friendly to the environment. They don't wear down so quickly. And we can formulate new compounds for antioxidants in the tires. Equally, with the textile industry, which is responsible for 10% of the world's wastewater and carbon, there are many things that we can do which actually make it more economic. And again, by way of example, I spent 5 years working in Bangladesh, and the textile industry use a huge amount of water at high temperature, but there's very little in terms of energy recycling, using heat exchangers to recover that energy. On one textile plant, we were able to recover 5 gigawatts of energy and develop a system which caused no pollution to the environment.
Thanks, Howard. Change clearly needs to happen, and it has already started. In 2020, the UN published the Sustainable Ocean Principles with 5 focus areas which frame 10 ambitions. These are intended to guide global policymaking and responsible stewardship of our oceans. The focus areas are sustainable seafood, ensuring traceability and bridging the production and dietary needs of people, decarbonisation of shipping, using international regulation to limit greenhouse gases from shipping and to establish an international maritime research and development fund, harnessing of ocean electricity, which requires the alignment of policy with clear targeted strategies and the creation of economic incentives, to end waste entering the ocean, and that includes plastics and nutrients, and finally, to map the oceans, to collect ocean data and share and manage it. So the direct effect of that framework will be felt most directly in the fishing, marine and energy sectors, but the impact will be far broader. For example, the shipping industry currently moves circa 80% of the world's goods and services within and between continents and nations. Changes to the shipping industry could impact that entire value chain. The wide reach of the principles is further evidenced by the companies who are signatories to it. They range from hospitality sector to the financial sector, from media to construction. In addition to bodies like the UN, there are also alliances focusing on stewardship of all water, including the oceans. The Alliance for Water Stewardship is a collective of over 100 organizations, mainly private sector, and including many companies with household names. These companies are committed to contributing to the sustainability of local water resources through the adoption and promotion of a universal framework for the sustainability of water use. But there needs to be more action. Diane, thinking about future regulation and the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure that is due to be published its recommendations in 2023, the increased focus on the role of nature and how we lead our lives and manage our business. Are you optimistic that regulation is coming that will stimulate some of the change that Howard is saying is needed? And what will that mean for business?
That was probably the perfect question for me, Amy, because I am definitely the optimist when it comes to this. I think having worked in a sort of policy and government environment, I suppose what we're talking about here are actually business opportunities. So, we're in a triple crisis here of pollution, of nature loss, of climate change. And I always, I was working in an economic development environment for, environmental clean technologies and water technologies. And, as we listen to what Howard's talking about there, it is the absolute why we now need this innovation. But a lot of the innovation will only happen if there is good, solid regulation with teeth. And as I say, we've just had the report on biodiversity. We've probably just about missed every target of the last 10 years that we're supposed to put in place. But I don't think that there's probably anybody on the planet. I mean, I hardly watch television, and yet I am seeing so much at the moment that tells me something is very, very far wrong. And also, I'm finding that people more and more are asking about what can be done. So the why, I think, is now being better understood. I think there are, you mentioned what the TNFD are thinking about, and their launch on the 10th of June was really interesting. They've done a lot, and they've come very far, very fast to provide a real framework. And I'm hopeful about regulation. Yes, I am. But actually, to some extent, I actually think I'm very excited about the proactive approach that the financial institutions around the world are taking, the insurers and the investors. And I actually, to some extent, place almost more hope there in the frameworks that are brought forward and the genuine understanding by those organizations who have got access to the use of big data to be able to really visualize what's going on and what the risks are to nature and to value nature. So my money would actually be on the financial community. And I think that really, the work, as I say, that Marsh have been very proactive in thinking about, what you're investing in. How, I even think about, the insurers' questions that I am being asked now, and I see gaps in those questions for our professional indemnity even. I'm seeing more and more people coming and asking about water within, because they're being asked about water by their insurers. So there's definitely a changing tide, a rising tide. And I think it is going to be, the financial, the lending, the underwriting, the investment area that I think you have the power more than anywhere, even more than regulators and governments, to really accelerate and mainstream a transition towards looking after biodiversity. But I do feel that, as Howard, I think, has probably explained very well, that this area of pollution that's being dumped on the ocean, I think the ocean is a bit, it's a bit like a person. It's just about had enough. And it's just, I can't take any more pollution. I can't take any more of these millions and millions of microplastics that are full of all this nasty stuff. And I very much hope that in moving forward that Marsh will be feeding into the TNFD and really getting them to look further upstream, and not just at the sort of, you know, the 5 typical sectors for the ocean economy, like fishing, like tourism, like maritime transport, but actually looking upstream and looking at, you know, the chemicals that are being used there that are polluting and causing that pollution, and looking at it at that sort of micro nano level, that molecular level. And I think that area is currently being ignored. And I very much hope that that's something that Marsh and your family of organisations will be able to take forward and highlight the issue and how it's linked to biodiversity and to climate change. And it's almost that we're overcomplicating it in some ways. For me, it's about, I think if I was an investor and an insurer, I would be wanting to say to companies that I was investing in, okay, I don't want any surprises. I want you to future-proof my money for the next 10 years. So you tell me how you're going to design out toxicity. How are you going to design out your emissions as well? And be looking at that. And alongside that, then the exciting thing there for me in terms of the economy is that there's all sorts of opportunities for green innovation, for green chemistry, you know, to bring forward investment in that 80% of the world that doesn't have wastewater, because that's going to have an impact on our health systems. It's going to have an impact on our biodiversity. So there's a lot of really good stuff. It's almost like a what's not to like, you know.
Thank you so much, and lovely to end on a note of optimism. I should have said at the outset when I said TNFD, that's the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure. So really the sister to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So if you're not familiar with that, please do reach out to one of your Marsh colleagues and they can tell you more about what's planned by the UN. Diane, really nice, positive end, and also very apt that you talk about sort of some of the microplastics and the impacts in the ocean, because I think that's part of your next few years at sea will be collecting data to help further our understanding of their extent and dispersion. So thank you both, Diane and Howard, so much for your time and your insight. We wish you every success with your endeavor of collecting the data. I also hope the data is telling us a positive story, but most definitely success with the endeavor. Thank you very much for listening. This was the second in a series of 2 podcasts. If you'd like to subscribe to our podcasts, please look at Apple Podcasts, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we look forward to speaking with you next time. Many thanks.